Tell Me a Story. Folklore and Irish Tales with Eddie Lenihan. Now, Eddie Lenihan here in Crusheen, County Clare again, and this time maybe it might be appropriate to, on the 25th anniversary of Clare's first win in how many years? They won in 1914 and they won again in 1995. I think nearly 25 years ago. And since there's so much nonsense talked about Biddy Early's curse on that team, which there was no such curse, of course, it might be appropriate to talk about the great woman herself. Now, Biddy Early was born in 1798, the year of the Great Rebellion, and she died on the 23rd of April 1874, which was a pretty long lifespan in those days, considering the hardships that people went through in the 19th century, because she was only a peasant woman, so-called, and had a very, very tough upbringing in her early years because her parents died very young. She was reared in the workhouse, it seems. We don't know an awful lot about her very young days, but for the present edition of my book, In Search of Biddy Early, I found out quite a number of new details about her, including her death cert, which hadn't been seen before, and the death cert of one of her 4 husbands, Tom Flannery. And they were married for 20 years, so obviously they got on very well together, herself and Tom. But she was an amazing woman. Some people think she was a witch, and of course she wasn't. She was a feasa, a woman of knowledge. She was a herbalist, she was a curing woman, and an extremely good psychologist, if we can follow the kind of cures she provided. She was a patient woman. She knew how to size people up who came to her, for good and bad. Bad in the sense that if you came to her to mock her, by God, she would teach you a lesson that you wouldn't forget. She didn't have, how would I say, she didn't suffer fools well. If you were talking about her, seemingly, on the way to her house, or before you came, and there's quite a number of examples of that, if you said, oh, that old bitch Biddy Early, God almighty, have we to travel 40 miles to her now? You know, this would be in an age of horse and car or walking. She'd know it when you came. Oh, so you're the man that was calling me an old bitch, huh? Well, you can go about your business now, but maybe his wife then would intervene, and Biddy would come around and say, all right, for your sake I'll cure him, but not for his sake. She was a generous woman. She always provided something for people who deserved it, and sometimes for people who didn't. There was always queues at her door for years and years, and it's that makes me think how patient a woman she was, because the kind of cures that she provided for free, because she was a real healing woman, she never asked for any money or anything, whereas if you wanted to pay her, yes, you could, and she accepted. And that's why the house was always full of poteen, because remember, it was mainly poor people who came to her, and what had they to give? They had no money to give. But people were making their own grog at the time, which served 2 purposes. They had no money for whiskey, and by making your own, you were cheating the government, which was the English government at the time, so you were doing your patriotic duty. And Biddy's house, being full of poteen, did get her into quite a lot of trouble, not alone with the police, whom she wasn't afraid of, no more than she was afraid of the clergy or afraid of anybody else. She was a woman ahead of her time like that. But it did get her into a lot of trouble, it seems, with the local women, because the local men were constantly at her house You know yourself, where there's free drink, there'll always be a crowd. And yes, she did get into trouble like that. But it was the clergy really were her. Now, some of the clergy, not all by any means, because there's stories about how some clergy came to her for cures themselves. Even one bishop came to her for a cure with his coach and four, as the story goes. But some of the clergy were dead against her. And in Feakle, that seems to have damped enthusiasm quite a bit for her, because there are stories about how people came looking for her in Feakle and they were not welcomed by the locals. They sometimes were put astray in Feakle when they looked for her house. Now, that's no blame maybe to local people, because, you see, the clergy were very powerful people at the time. You would not get the sacrament, as old people told me, if you pointed out Biddy's house to strangers. So you see, there's many angles to the Biddy story. There's political, there's social, there's psychological. She was a complicated woman, but overall a good woman. There can be no doubt about that. She provided a service. A healing service, a psychological service, social service. She provided a service when there was no other service available for poor people. Rich people had money, poor people hadn't, and that made all the difference. Biddy was a good woman and a decent woman. Now, why would so many stories survive about somebody like that if she wasn't important? There's the story of Biddy and the priest's horse is the most famous of all the stories that survived. How she taught a priest from Tipperary a lesson, an arrogant priest who came to punish her, and she stuck his horse to the road and stuck him to the horse until such a time as he apologised for what he had said about her. And the story the lesson that teaches, I think, is that it is something that many people would love to have said to priests themselves at the time, but they daren't. Biddy did. And people were delighted that somebody would stand up to the clergy like that. And that is the story that has survived best in people's memories. And the other one that has survived, of course, is the funny story about the poor man from up around here someplace who couldn't afford his rent. The rent had to be paid twice a year, or else you could be evicted, which was a terrible, terrible thought. You could be thrown out on the road by the landlord's agent if he chose. And if he wanted to give your house to some one of his friends or whoever, your house could be demolished and bye-bye. We have plenty of examples of that. But this poor man couldn't afford his rent. All he had was 2 pigs, and the pigs had to be sold for the best price he could get. He could have sold them in Ennis. There was a bacon factory in Ennis, but sure, Ennis was only a small little 4th-street town that time. So he decided that he'd take the pigs instead down to Shaw's bacon factory in Limerick, which was the biggest bacon factory in Munster at the time. It is gone now, but not quite gone, because there's one little phrase yet that reminds us of Shaw's bacon factory, and you know what that is. If you serve time in Limerick jail, you serve time at the back of Shaw's. At the back of Shaw's, Limerick jail was just at the back of Shaw's bacon factory. So if anybody ever says to you, "Oh, were you on the back of Shaw's?" you were in Limerick jail. So anyway, he decided he'd go down to Shaw's bacon factory with his pigs. But the problem is, you see, pigs are bad walkers, and fat pigs are very bad walkers. And the poor man, the railway was here, but sure, he had no money, and his neighbours were in the same state as himself. They had no money to give him, so he decided he'd walk the pigs. But 32 miles is a long way for pigs, or for people to walk. And he hadn't even a horse and car. He was that poor. So he said he'd take a shortcut. And he had to start out the night before. And the shortcut was from here to Tulla to Kilkishen, by Kilmurray, and on, and come out below at Setrites and into Limerick. It would cut about 12 miles off his journey, which was significant. So he did. Started out here the evening before and headed on. Now, he took it, of course, walk 2 or 3 miles, take a break, walk a couple of miles, take a break, give the pigs a chance. And, of course, he was all right. Well, he was walking the 12 miles from here to Tulla. He knew that very well, going to fairs and all the rest of it. And he knew the road to Kilkishen, he knew that. But remember, at that time, this would be the 1860s sometime, people lived very local lives. And in the darkness, well, different world entirely. When darkness came in those days, darkness came. When a lamp or a candle in a window won't give you much light. And the other thing was, at crossroads there was no signpost. And when he came to Kilkishen, it was completely dark. And after that he didn't know his way. And it was the pigs were leading him. And on they went. And by the morning, sure Christ, they were gone astray entirely. They were gone north instead of south. They were arrived at Feakle. And completely out of their way. And the poor old pigs, they collapsed in a heap on the road. And no amount of kicking or cajoling or coaxing, they were down, and that was that. And the poor man even, what am I going to do? I will be thrown out. And a man came along the road, and he said, what's wrong, poor man? Oh, my pigs are down. Shh. Why don't you go to Biddy? Biddy who? Biddy Early, God almighty. And of course he had heard of Biddy Early, of course. Everyone knew about Biddy Early. Where is she? She's above there, look, above in the height, above in the, where her cottage is, the remains of the old bit of a cottage today. And I'd mind your pigs, go on. They were not minding him. So on he went anyway, and it was early in the morning, and big God, he was lucky because there was only maybe 2 ahead of him. It was late in the day, there'd be a quarter of a mile of people. So big God, anyway, up he went. And he was next within 15 minutes, and there was Biddy at the half door. And by God, she knew him, knew his name and all the rest of it. Brought him in, gave him a cup of tea, and, well, she said, tell me. Because she knew, just to put him at his ease. And he told her about the pigs that were down in the same rigmarole. Shh. She said, don't, you'll be all right. And she went up into the room, and she came down after a couple of minutes. And in her hand she had these little 3 twists of paper. And she gave them to him. No, she said, put them in your pocket. And when you go back to where the pigs are, she said, the first pig, lift up his tail and stick one of those, where, and do the same with the second pig. She's a bit vulgar. Biddy wasn't a vulgar woman at all. And your man was listening. And, normally, he had heard about Biddy. Normally she'd give you a bottle and maybe water or whatever, and she'd give you instructions on how to rub it, whatever was the ailment, or how to drink it, or say whatever prayers. But this was a new one on him. But anyway, you didn't question Biddy, you did what she told you. There was no come back, do it once, that was that. So he thanked her and put his hand in his pocket as if to pay. But Biddy knew very well that he had no money. Go on, she said, go on, you'll get to Limerick fine. He went back anyway to where the pigs were, and the man that was minding the pigs said, well, did you meet her? Did you see her? And he took out one of the little twists of paper or whatever it was, the little, and he did what Biddy told him, run up the pig's tail and stuck this, where the sun don't shine, and did the same to the second pig. And immediately the poor old pigs that were there with their ears down and they're looking miserable, immediately the ears stood up and the tail stood up like 2 ramrods. Up they sprang and off like 2 greyhounds. And your man, my pigs, Biddy, what do you do? And he had to lead out after them. Well, Feakle village was only half a mile away, and the people were going about their morning chores, getting their bucket of water out of the well, and next thing in gallops these 2 pigs into the village, and people, holy Christ, what's this? You don't expect to see 2 big pigs galloping through, in and out of the village like that. Christ, I thought they were seeing a ghost or something. What in God's name was this? And next thing your man, stop, where are my pigs? And that was that in and out with him and gone. Holy God almighty, what was that? And on they went. Well, between Feakle and Broadford, there's 12 miles. And the pigs, they covered them 12 miles in record time. And Broadford now, when you get to Broadford, it was like that, in and out. And there's the old RIC barracks there on your left at the butt of Violet Hill, and on then to the right, and the road to Limerick. But it was the very same in Broadford, people doing their morning, a bit later now, chores, going, as I say, to the well and this and that, talking among themselves. And same story, the two pigs galloped in and out of the village like that. And of course, your man now, he was 10 or 15 minutes behind them, even the young man no more. And he, where's the pigs? Where's the pigs? I just pointed him out the Limerick Road, and on he went after them. And there's a big, long, straight stretch thing, 3 miles, and the Broadford Hills on your left. Lovely part of the country and lovely part of Clare, but an awful lot of people don't ever see that. They all head to West Clare and the Cliffs of Moher and that, but lovely part of Clare. And as your man came into this side of it, of the straight stretch, the pigs were gone out the other side. And your man had to stop. Oh, Jesus, Biddy, he says, Christ, what do you have to do? My pigs are gone, we'll be thrown out. And then he thought, didn't you give me 3? He put his hand in his pocket and he brought out the third one, lifted down the trousers, stuck the third one, where. And Lord Christ, he had only barely time to pick up his trousers around his waist when his 2 legs went out from under him and off. And the man that told me the story said he got up to the pigs just going into Limerick, and he shouted to the people around there, some few people, stop my pigs, stop the pigs. And Limerick people, they're very obliging and they corralled all pigs for him. And as soon as he got his breath, he drove him on up to the factory, Shaw's factory. And there was a few of the workmen out, smoking a fag, I suppose it was break time. And I saw these 2 creatures coming, and they're nearly purple now with all the running. And they sent in for the ganger, the foreman. And Jesus, I said, come out, you see what's here. And he came out. Christ, he says to your man with the pigs, what's them? Huh? Oh, Christ, your man, are you buying pigs today, huh? Oh, you're buying pigs, he says, if they are pigs. Oh, Christ almighty. He says, will you stop your fool? Will you take them in and weigh them? They were tucking and weighed. No, they had a fair bit of weight lost with all the running, but the long and the short of the story was they were bought. And he got for them what would be what would pay 2/3 of the year's rent to come. Now that man, he could have took the train back now that he had the money back here to Crusheen, but he didn't. He insisted on walking all the way back to Feakle, and took his place in the queue. It was well out in the day now. There was a long queue there, but he took his place in the queue. And when he finally came to the door, Biddy was waiting. She laughed. Well, she said, you're back. I am. And he put his hand down in his pocket to pay her, and she wouldn't take it. No, she said, go home, she says, and pay your rent now, and be thankful. But that Christmas, that man, he insisted on buying her a goose, because there were no turkeys that time. It was all geese, Turkeys are only an American invention of late years. But he insisted on buying her a goose, and he delivered it down to her in person and thanked her again for what she had done for him. And I think in a way that story illustrates that Biddy had a sense of humour. Not funny ha-ha, but the kind of sense of humour that helped people when they were down on their luck. And it shows, maybe part of the reason, it shows that people appreciated her, and maybe shows also why she's still remembered 140 years after she died. She was a rounded character. She had sympathy for people, be they up or down, or she was a real person, not just one of these legendary characters that we know her name. Or she was a real person, and still is very, very near to people. She could foretell, Biddy, there's no doubt about that. I remember a story, it was a sad story too, about these 2 brothers. They had cattle, and one of the cattle went missing. At a time, you see, when one cow, could mean the difference between being able to pay your rent and not being able to pay your rent. And these weren't rich men, but one of the cattle went missing. And one of the brothers went to Biddy to find out where might the cow be. And Biddy was hesitant about telling him. She said, you might be better off not to know. Oh God, he says, I want to know. Why wouldn't I want to know? Because a cow is a cow. Well, she said, you'll find that cow, and she named the place. Then he said, but isn't that my brother's field? They seemingly didn't get on too well, the brothers. Now, I'd advise you, she said, maybe leave the cow there. It might be for the best, but the choice is your own. Oh, he said, I want the cow. All right, she said, it is your choice. He went home, and he went to the field, and sure enough, as Biddy had said, the cow was there in the field. It wasn't a big field, and the field was in an awkward kind of a place away from the road. Obviously, the cow hadn't wandered in there on its own. Maybe the brother had taken the cow, who knows. But he was bringing out the cow out of the field when the brother appeared, and the fight broke out, the argument. The bad blood had been there before that. And there happened to be an implement, seemingly a sickle, in the other fellow's hand. And Christ, didn't he take the head off of the brother that was bringing out the cow? Killed him. And it was true for Biddy. You'd be maybe as well off to leave the cow where it was, where she was. So she knew that the bringing out of that cow would come to no good. And there were several cases of that where Biddy could tell that for the future, a person who was doing something would be better off to leave things be. And sometimes it was near, sometimes it might be 10 years' time. And the unfortunate thing, human nature being human nature, a person might forget. Biddy might cure a person now and tell them, avoid such and such a place where that thing happened. It might be that they had interfered with something of the otherworldly. She could cure them this time, but don't go there again. And they'd be so delighted, they'd go away, forget about it, do it again. A very, very human thing, we all forget. The sickness would come back, and Biddy wouldn't be able to cure it a second time when they went back to get a cure. You didn't do what I told you. And of course, they wouldn't know what she was talking about until it dawned that, oh no, she told me not to. She could do nothing about it then. Biddy seemingly could cure you once, but a second time, it was up to yourself then. It was up to yourself then. A cure was two-sided. Biddy could do something, yes, but you had to do something also. And at the end of her life, when the priest finally came to her to give her the last sacrament, there's a very poignant kind of a scene. The priest thought, at last. We have several versions of this, but there's one very, very, very interesting story that comes down to us of the priest coming in and demanding her bottle, her famous dark bottle, not wanting to give her the sacrament until the bottle is handed over. And of course she does. At this stage, she has no further use for her famous bottle and gives it to him. And he throws it into the lake below, Biddy Early's lake, Carter's Loch as it appears on the maps. And, he gives her the lake. But in another version, there's right up to the end, there is that battle of power, that battle of wills. There's a crow up in a tree outside. And Biddy, the crow is cawing. And Biddy looks up at the crow and she says something or other, and the crow stops cawing. And she says something else, and the crow falls down off of the tree, dead. And now she said, Father, could you do that? And the priest, convinced that she's working by the power of the devil. But she says, she doesn't want to be cruel to an animal, whatever she says. Up gets the old crow again and back up on the tree. And the priest, of course, can't do that. So right to the end, she's defiant. She won't give in at all to power of the church or the state or anybody. There's always that in the stories about her, that she's defiant to the end. And of course, her 4 marriages are further proof that. And what I found out this time around was that I didn't have in the previous edition of the book, but I found it out by going through the newspapers and all, that she had become quite a tourist attraction in her last years. She had made the newspapers and all. She was becoming a tourist attraction. Great woman, wonderful woman.